Cool. I will go ahead and record this.
Okay, awesome.
Starting now. It's always fun. I mean, it's, the great thing about wine tasting, and we'll get into this, is, even if you have the same wine 2 days in a row, it's not going to taste the same. Even if the bottle is identical, we're not, right? We're different people from day to day. What we eat, our mood, where we are, with the music in the background, they all affect how wine smells and tastes. And I know that kind of sounds a little, maybe it sounds new age, but I mean, if you take the same bottle of wine and put heavy metal in the background and write down how you describe it, and then the next day take that wine and have classical music, your descriptors are going to be totally different. It's one of the things. Yeah, I mean, over the last year, I've done probably 100 of these Zooms, and over the last year, I think I've been concentrating more on the psychology and sociology of this than anything else, because I find it fascinating. I really find, I don't find individuality fascinating, because it's kind of, we all know that we're different, but on these Zooms, it comes out in a beautiful way, and I love to see that happen. So now we're still waiting on a couple of other people.
Too bad.
Well, I'm letting Kinsey make the call on this, not me. So, but I do believe we're waiting on maybe 3 or 4 other people.
Yeah, let me check the list really quickly.
Danielle says she'll be just a few minutes late because she has a press call.
Okay. And then Nick is not going to be able to join us. So I think you can go ahead and start, and those few people can catch up.
So I guess question number 1, explain to me your company and what you guys do, because I always like to understand who I'm talking with and where their mindset is.
Not it. Somebody else. We should all just do not it as fast as we can. Who wants to do it?
Corey. I'll do it. Oh, Corey. Okay. I don't want to volunteer someone. We are a nonprofit based in DC working on cross-partisan political reform. So that means we are lobbying to pass laws on everything from election administration, election integrity, to strengthen congressional ethics, transparency laws. Money in politics is a huge bucket of work as well. So we all fall into different departments. But yeah, the goal is to pass legislation that fixes broken government.
Well, that's awesome. I love hearing that. Finance campaign laws are certainly a pretty major issue in my book, and glad to hear that you're working on that. Being nonpartisan, that's got to be a little challenging these days. Is there such a thing? Unfortunately, I know you guys tried for it.
It's tough.
Well, I think unfortunately the definition of nonpartisan has changed radically in the last 4 years, which is unfortunate. But it's got to make it more challenging for you guys, but then probably more rewarding when you are able to accomplish what you accomplish. So I won't get political in this conversation, though we might. We'll see where the wines go and how you react to the wines, and then we'll go from there. So, well, I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Larry. I'm owner winemaker of Tercero Wines. I've been making wine for about 20 years, but I didn't start out making wine. I actually started out, I went to school as an undergraduate at UC Davis up near Sacramento, which is considered one of the top winemaking schools in the world, but I wasn't interested in wine. I didn't grow up in a family that drank wine. My dad was an elementary school teacher. My mom was raising 5 boys. We believed that there was a whole lot of hard alcohol hidden around the house to make it through the day, but we only found a couple of bottles. But I wasn't thinking about wine. So I ended up transferring from Berkeley to from Davis, UC Berkeley, graduated from the Berkeley Business School, the Haas Business School, and I was in the music industry as a financial analyst. I love music. During high school, I took pictures of punk bands in the LA music scene. I really wanted to get into the A&R and marketing side of music. That didn't happen. So I ended up switching and going into publishing, educational publishing and educational toys, and then trade publishing. And I did that for a long time, but about 20 years ago, I just felt like my mind wasn't being challenged, and life is way too short, I feel, to not really enjoy what you do on a daily basis. So I decided to go back to school. The problem was science was the devil language to me. I wanted nothing to do with science, and winemaking is science, right? So I started taking classes at community colleges in my area with kids who literally could have been my kids. taking general chemistry, biology, a complete do-over, right? I did that for 2 years. I worked part-time in a wine region called Temecula, which is down by San Diego, and then transferred back to UC Davis where I got my start and got my master's degree in viticulture and enology. So viticulture is the science of grape growing. It's the agricultural side of our business. Enology is the science of winemaking. That's the chemistry and microbiology. Graduated and moved up to where I'm at now. I'm sitting in my tasting room here in a little city called Los Olivos, which is an area called the Santa Ynez Valley, made famous by the movie Sideways. That movie was all filmed in this area. I'm about 40 minutes north of Santa Barbara, about 3 hours, well, between 3 and 8 hours north of LA, depending upon traffic, and about 5 hours south of San Francisco, just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm at. I work with fruit specifically from this area. Everything I work with is a 25-mile radius of here. So I got out of school, moved up here. I worked for Fess Parker Winery, one of the largest wineries in the region. And I like to tell people that's really where my education began. You go to school to be a doctor, a lawyer, a political activist. You're really not that until you've been in the field for a number of years, understanding the trials and tribulations, and winemaking is the same way. I understood the theoretical aspect of winemaking, but Mother Nature doesn't care about theory. So every year it's going to be different, right? So it took about 10 years to be comfortable calling myself a winemaker, at which point I decided to leave Fess Parker and concentrate on my own brand. So I work only with fruit from Santa Barbara County. I truly, honestly believe this is the most underappreciated county wine-wise in the state of California. We make some killer wines here. We're just really not known for it. And I work specifically with Rhone varieties. So most people are familiar with, if you drink wine at all, you're probably familiar with Bordeaux varieties. So those are varieties that are associated with the Bordeaux region of France. That's Cabernet, Merlot. On the white side, Sauvignon Blanc. A lot of people are familiar with Burgundy. That's Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from the Burgundy region of France. The Rhone Valley sits just below Burgundy on the eastern side of France. The northern Rhone is very cold. The southern Rhone is very warm. That's where Châteauneuf-du-Pape is, one of the most famous wine regions in the world. There's 22 varieties that are associated with that area, and I work with about half of them. Not all of them are available in the US, but a number of them are. There's an organization called the Rhone Rangers, and this is a domestic advocacy group to educate people about Rhone varieties. I'm on the national board of directors, and I'm president of the local Santa Barbara County chapter. I love these varieties. I love exposing people to these varieties and kind of breaking out of the mold of Cab, Merlot, Pinot, et cetera, because there's a lot out there other than those things. So I like to start my tastings by saying that there's two ground rules. Number one, you cannot be wrong with what you smell and taste in any wine. Do not let anyone tell you that you're wrong, because it's your impression. It's your taste buds. And you guys will all appreciate this, all of you in the Washington, D.C. area. I did a tasting about 4 months ago. And on one of my red wines, a woman said that she smelled cherry blossoms. And I stopped the tasting. It was a tasting people from around the country. Her name was Lisa. I said, Lisa, did you grow up or work in D.C., Washington State, or Japan? She lived and was born in DC. I can imagine what a cherry blossom is. I would never pick it out on a wine note because it's not part of my DNA. And our DNA is, our memory DNA is based on where we grew up, the foods we ate growing up, the culture we grew up in. So my blackberry is your blueberry. We're both right? Because that's our perception of what we're smelling. So you cannot be wrong. You also can't offend me. So if you smell something, you're like, that doesn't sound right. If it smells like that to you, it smells like that to you. I'm not offended. I have 3 kids. I have 4 brothers. Bring it on. I'm used to hearing pretty much anything and everything. So think about that. One of the challenges, I think, when it comes to wine tasting is we kind of have it set in our mind that there's a box, a construct, that red wines are supposed to smell and taste like this and white wines. And we look at the picture clue of the wine. Don't think about that. Because the reality is that your smell and taste memories are the strongest memories you have. The challenge is to let yourself go outside the box. So when we're smelling these wines and tasting these wines, think of fruits and vegetables, think of herbs and spices, think of flowers, think of oak. And if none of that comes to mind, how does the wine make you feel? Or what scenario does it remind you of? And I'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the tasting. The second kind of rule is there's no such thing as a stupid question. Not only do I make wine, I've been doing it now for almost 20 years. Occasionally teach introduction to winemaking for a local community college. I love the subject matter. Wine is intimidating to people and confusing. So if I can help answer any questions you might have to help with that, whether it's related to my wines or not, please ask away. So before we get started, I need to have a volunteer, Kinsey, to ask a series of questions that's going to help me determine your palate. And then everyone else, it's going to be relatable to them as well. They're not difficult questions to answer, trust me.
Okay, should I pick the volunteer?
Yes, but not me. You get to do it, not me.
Okay, I will pick Sid.
Okay. So,
Excellent.
Sid, very simple question. Do you drink your coffee black or do you put some kind of creamer or non-dairy creamer in it?
I'm sorry to say I put a little bit of creamer in it.
Don't be sorry. Do you put a little, do you need creamer? So it sounds like you need creamer in it.
I don't need it, but do I like it? Yes,
So you
I
can drink
prefer
it-
it. But I will drink black coffee.
But you're not going to like it.
No, I still like it. I just feel like it cuts down the acidity a little bit.
Okay.
Having a little bit of creamer in it.
So my guess is that if I give you scotch or whiskey, if you drink scotch or whiskey, you probably prefer it neat. You don't need it on ice or in a mixed drink. That'd be accurate.
I don't really like whiskey.
Not a problem. My guess is you probably prefer savory foods over sweet foods. And if it's going to be sweet, it's going to be dark chocolate.
Ooh, I do love dark chocolate. Gosh, I don't know. Lately, I've been on a bit of a sweet kick, but yeah, sure, savory. Let's go savory.
Okay. Yeah, and it's preferences more than anything else. My guess is that you probably like Brussels sprouts and probably really like them where I can shave them raw and you're fine, unless you had bad ones as a kid and I'm not paid enough to do psychoanalysis.
I do love Brussels sprouts, like a lot.
My guess is you also like pickles and pickled things quite a bit.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So my guess is that when it comes to wine, I'm going to guess you prefer, in general, red wines over white wines.
Mhm.
And I'm going to guess one of the reasons is you find white wines sweeter to you than they are to other people.
Yep.
And then my guess is when it comes to red wines, the red wines that you prefer are going to be more earthy and rustic rather than fruity. Would that be accurate?
I don't know. I feel like I don't have too much of a preference, but I do feel like I lean a little bit towards fruity. But I don't like overly fruity. Like I like just a touch, a hint. So I guess maybe I do lean a little bit more earthy, but I do like a little bit of fruit.
Well, now I can see the nonpartisan in you. I understand. You don't want to, you don't want to offend anyone, so you want to make sure you're playing both sides. I get it. I understand. So does anyone drink their coffee? Does anyone need cream or milk in their coffee? Okay. So those of you who do, my guess is the answers to almost all of those questions are going to be the opposite. So if you might like Brussels sprouts, they darn well better be roasted with balsamic or bacon. You're not going to want them raw, usually. If you drink scotch or whiskey, it's always going to be on ice or in a mixed drink. You're probably not going to want to drink it much, would be my guess. If you drink your coffee with cream, you tend to like bittersweet or milk chocolate over dark chocolate in general. And then if you drink your coffee with cream, you may not have a preference red or white, but you tend not to like whites that are too dry. You probably like them slightly sweet, but it's not cool to say we like sweet wine, so no one ever admits that, but it's okay. And then when it comes to red wines, when you drink your coffee with cream, you tend to like them smooth and more fruity than earthy. And there's no absolutes here. Does this not hold for anyone? So I'd be really curious because there's always outliers, and I love to hear the outliers.
I might be an outlier.
All right.
I like dry, very earthy.
But you drink your coffee with cream.
A little bit.
So why do you put cream in your coffee?
Smoother, a little less acidic.
Okay, so both you and Sid were on the acid side, which is interesting because normally, why do we put cream in our coffee? Normally, we would do it to cut the bitterness, not the acidity, right? But people also do it for the color. They like the color of cream in their coffee. Some people do it for the texture. They tend to like that type of texture. But if you don't need, if you put just a little bit, it probably means you probably don't need it. Rather than people that, this more pertains to people that have a little bit of coffee with their milk, if that makes sense. That's more the extreme. But generally, when you drink your coffee, when you drink your coffee black, like I said, all these things hold. I've had exceptions. My favorite outlier, I had a guy wouldn't drink his coffee black, but he loved everything bitter as can be. I'm like, why don't you drink it black? He said, well, my dad used to drink it black. My dad would breathe on me. I hate my dad. The psychology of why we eat and drink what we do is pretty amazing. And like I said, over the last year, I've learned a lot from people in terms of why they do what they do. I've had people say that they will not drink their coffee with cream, but they don't like bitter things. And the reason they don't put cream or milk in their coffee is it's not healthy. And my reaction to that is find something else to drink. Why spend time drinking something that doesn't taste good to you? I don't get it. Or people that drink or put cream in their coffee, even though they like bitter things, because they don't like hot things. Chances are they burned their tongue or something as a kid. Again, leave it out for 10 minutes and it kind of cools down, right? Anyways, like I said, the psychology of this fascinates me. And we'll get into that as we get going. Let's go ahead and start tasting wine. So the first one we're going to have is the Verbiage Blanc. It's the white of the wines you have. And feel free to, to reach out with questions. You can put stuff in the chat. I'm following the chat as well, or you can ask questions. It's a small group. And when we're tasting this, as I said before, think about when you're smelling it. So people ask me all the time, well, I'm smelling wine, what do I do? Right? So what I always suggest people to do is swirl it a little bit, smell it before you do anything else, and kind of get some initial smells. If any of you drinking out of the bottle, I would get even a coffee cup, because the problem is when you're drinking it out of that little bottle, you're not going to be able to smell a thing. The other thing is when you say, I see Anne smelling the bottle. The problem with smelling a little bottle is sometimes if wine sits on the surface of it, that might lead to some weird smells on the surface that are not indicative of what's inside the wine. So I'm always cautious about that. But I always tell people, so swirl the wine first, right? Smell it, take a little sip, and that's going to give you kind of initial reaction. But because this is your first sip of wine, food and other things are going to affect how that first sip is going to be. You're going to perceive that first sip. And then kind of take a bigger sip. And what I like to say is kind of put it in your mouth and kind of let it sit on your tongue. I like to say that the texture in wine, every wine's going to have a different texture. And this one has this great kind of unctuous quality. There's 3 varieties in it. The Roussanne and Marsanne are kind of like the Scotch or whiskey or bourbon of grape varieties. They're all texture and they don't have a lot of acidity. The Grenache Blanc is added to give this wine acidity, to kind of give it a finish that it wouldn't have otherwise. But you're going to notice that this wine is kind of thick. And it's not a good or bad thing. It just kind of is. It's going to sit on your tongue totally differently than, say, like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Pinot Gris are going to.
Larry, I have a question. Are your wines typical alcohol contents? Just out of curiosity. Are these high, low? No?
Well, that's a really tough question to answer. I guess when it comes to whites, if you're dealing with a really dry, crisp white wine, they're going to run you can get Vino Verdes out of Spain that are 9%, which are pretty rare. Most white wines are going to start about 12, and they're going to go up to about 15 to 16. We tend to think of red wines having more alcohol than white wines, but certain varieties will have more alcohol. Chardonnays, for instance, will go probably about 12.5 to 15, depending upon from whether it's oak fermented, or whether it's stainless steel fermented. A lot of variables that come into play. When we start getting into some of my wines, they're lower than most places. And then some of the wines are going to be right kind of in target. This one is kind of in the middle. The alcohol level is a little over 14%. And that alcohol level is also allowing the wine to have body. Because the thing about alcohol is we think of alcohol as just it, right? Alcohol, but alcohol actually adds texture to a wine. So too little alcohol and it's going to be thin. Too much and it's going to be fumy and alcoholic. So there is a balance that you need to come up with. So those of you who are not having this wine chilled, and if you don't have it chilled, it's okay. The perception of the wine is going to be totally different if you have it chilled versus not chilled. So those of you who are serving it chilled, the aromatics are going to be a little more muted than those that are not chilled, but the texture is going to be much more expansive. If it's chilled, you're going to notice acid on the finish. If it's not chilled, you're not going to notice acid, and it's almost going to take on a little bit of a perceived sweetness. So it's kind of it's a chameleon of a wine actually, because we talk about food and wine pairings. When it's cold, the acid makes it great to go with things like an Alfredo sauce, because that acid will kind of cut through that. At room temperature, the acid's not noticeable at all. You can actually have it with Asian food and Indian food, and it goes great. And I use as an example, I know it's silly, but think of Coca-Cola, right? Take a Coca-Cola, stick it in the fridge, get it cold, take it out and drink it. It's actually refreshing. It's sweet, but it's refreshing because the carbonic acid is brought up with the CO2, with the temperature, right? At room temperature, the chemistry of Coke is the exact same thing. The perception is different. It's going to be syrupy. You're not going to notice any of that carbonic acid whatsoever. So wine, you can do the same thing depending upon the temperature you're serving it at. So I did give each of you a piece of paper with kind of lines to write. We don't have to do that. The reason I tend to suggest at least starting with that, the power of suggestion when it comes to wine is pretty huge. If one of you says, I smell whatever, everyone is gonna look for that exact same thing. And because it's difficult to name something, you're putting the suggestion in somebody's head, and they're probably gonna look for that exact same thing. And that's okay, but it's always fun to hear independently what people think of the wines. So Corey says team chilled. So my guess, Corey, is that you drink your coffee with cream, right? Or milk?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. When you serve, and what we can get into this, but when you chill a red wine, it's kind of like chilling scotch or whiskey, right? It makes it much easier to drink. You miss out on some of the aromatics and some of the texture, but I don't care. Yeah, I tell people all day long, put an ice cube in a wine. I don't care. I'm not going to judge you on how you drink your wine. Don't judge me on how I dance. Pretty simple. Because ultimately it comes down to your enjoyment, no one else's. So therefore, you can have a red wine that's really bitter, and somebody who drinks your coffee black would love it. If you have it slightly chilled, somebody who drinks your coffee with cream is going to like it as well. The exact same wine. So, this is one of the situations where there's rules, and there's this feeling like you're supposed to do things a certain way. Don't follow that. Follow what makes sense for you, and don't care what anyone else thinks, because ultimately it's your enjoyment, and there's no set rules here to follow.
I feel like the ice in the white and the ice in the rosé is like a new thing for like 40-something-year-old moms. Or has it always been a thing? And I'm just, now that I'm a 40-something-year-old mom, I like to put ice in my wine. I don't get it.
I've done it since I was like a child.
Okay, so it's been around forever. All
Yeah,
right.
my grandma did it all the time.
Okay, okay.
I think it's been around. I think that, again, you go through life. It's kind of like food, right? When I mentioned things like Brussels sprouts, it's really funny because I've had some of these tastings where people are like, you are not allowed to say Brussels sprouts, because they had bad ones as a kid, right? And they can't get over that. I think when it comes to wine, we all kind of go through a journey with wine, depending upon how much we drink, depending upon who we're drinking with. And you eventually get to a point, you're like, you know what? This is what I like. I don't really care what anyone else thinks. And you probably really like your whites and rosé cold. Now, it also comes down to, if you don't have it in the fridge, you're going to put an ice cube in to chill it down really fast, as opposed to having it in the fridge. If you had it in the fridge, my guess is you probably wouldn't do that. Except, listen, you're sitting outside, it's 90 degrees outside. Wine, we don't need to geek out about wine. You know what I mean? Everyone thinks like, oh, you got to have all these, some people are never going to go there. They just want to enjoy it. I had a jazz musician in my taste room about a year ago. He goes, Larry, I drink a lot of wine. It all kind of tastes the same to me. I looked at him. I said, yeah, jazz all sounds the same to me. I took a step back to avoid the punch. He just wasn't into it, right? It wasn't something that he thought much about. And I think with most people, that's wine, right? It's just something they know they're supposed to order it at a restaurant, a white or a red. They don't know what. They just want to enjoy it, and they probably don't want it to be too difficult to understand. Totally fine. I'm not here to change that opinion whatsoever. It's kind of like you go to a museum and you look at a painting for 10 seconds. What are you going to get? Not much, one or two things. You have to want to put a little bit of time into it, which is why a tasting like this is kind of fun, because we force the issue of smelling and tasting, something you may not regularly do. But it's, wine is something that either you enjoy doing or don't, but we make it very intimidating for people to kind of get into it. And that's one of the things that I try to change as much as possible. When we are back to normal, whatever the new normal is, I suggest going to going to local wine shops and going wine tasting, and enjoying, 4 or 5 or 6 wines, because really that's how you get to understand what you like and what you don't like. Going into a restaurant, having chills because you want to order a bottle of wine and not knowing what you want to order, and looking at the pricing going, I don't want to do that, but I guess I'm supposed to do that. That's not the way to get people into drinking wine. So does anyone have any comments about the wine? Any descriptors, any smells, any tastes?
I can say what I thought about it. On the notes and smell, I definitely got an apples, and I also thought it was a little nutty. I don't know what nut, but I got a little nutty. And then I also think the taste was a little smoky.
Okay.
That's all I have to say about it. I don't know anything else.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I smell like pecan in this. It kind of reminded me of like baked goods at the fair, just like that aromatic scent coming through the plastic, like whenever you're looking at something. So it was very strange to like smell that.
Love it.
Yeah,
So-
and I love hard cider, and that's what it did for me. It was like reminiscent of a hard cider.
So one of the, some people will find, and I oftentimes find stone fruit. I find like pear in this. That's not something most people are going to find because it's a very subtle smell. The other thing is, I talked about the construct. We tend to think of white wine and we tend to think of citrus. We tend to think of apple. You look at the color. Many of you probably found some sense of richness as well. Some people will say buttery. Some people will say creamy, because this wine tends to have that richness. And as I said, it's a heavy wine. It does sit on your tongue. And those of you who haven't finished the bottle that are cold, let it get closer to room temperature and you'll see that even more. You'll see that kind of voluptuousness kind of go across your tongue. But it's a fun wine. This is a white wine that's based on the whites of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So the idea is to have richness, but have acidity as well. But yeah, I mean, all the descriptors you guys are giving are certainly in line. But I love the hard cider and the baked goods at a fair, because again, those are unique to you guys. And it was so the question, Grant, you didn't expect to have that reaction. Is that when you were, it brought back something that you was totally unexpected?
Yeah, I was just like, what is this? Because at first I thought it was like, it reminded me of funnel cake. And I was like, it's not exactly that, but it's something familiar along that lines. And then whenever Sid said some kind of nut, then I was like, yeah, it's definitely like something towards that line. So yeah.
Very cool. And the rest of you probably got totally different things. Now, some of you think, well, I can't smell anything. Of course, the first thing I'm going to say is COVID, right? But it really, just spend a little bit of time and kind of go stream of consciousness. Don't think too much about it, because I think that's the thing, is when we're smelling wine, we want to come up with like 1 or 2 things. The reality is that when you swirl the glass, you're breaking chemical bonds, creating new ones. That's why wine changes. When the temperature changes in the wine, that's going to create different aromatics as well. So don't be surprised if you smell something and then it kind of goes away and something else comes out and like, well, I guess it's not there, but it was there and then it went away, right? So even think in those terms too. I oftentimes have that happen with wine, where I'll smell something and it'll just be a scent of something and it'll bring back a memory and I'll say this, and I'll smell the wine again and it's not there, but it was there. So I'm claiming it, right? Even if I'm not getting it the second time, I still got it the first time. That's what it reminded me of. That's part of the journey. Well, cool. If no other questions about that. So as I said, that wine is Marsanne, Roussanne, and Grenache Blanc. So most of you are on the East Coast, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're looking for a wine that's similar to this, as I said, look for a Châteauneuf-du-Pape or look for a Côte du Rhône. So those would be the French equivalents of it. The specific varieties and percentages will be different, but the whole idea of those wines is to kind of blend these varieties together to create something that has richness, but also has acidity. Well, cool. Let's move on to the second wine, which is the rosé. So this is my Mourvedre Rosé. You're some of the first people trying this wine, in all honesty, because I just bottled it at the beginning of February. And this is a wine I'm probably better known for than any other wine at this point. This wine's been considered one of the top rosés in the state the last half dozen years or so. So the grapes come in. I foot stomp the grapes. They're only on the skins for an hour. And the reason they're on the skins for an hour is they're going to pull out color from the skins and they're going to pull out texture from the skins. And then they go into the press. It's pressed. And then it is put into a tank. Now, when you press grapes, you tend to think the juice is clear like the wine, and it's not, because the grapes have all kinds of dirt in it and little bits of skin. That falls out of solution. We take the juice off of that and then put that into another tank and ferment it really cold to hold on to some very specific aromas. And then I age this mainly in stainless steel with a little bit of oak to add a little more texture to it. Sydney, you're asking, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the foot stomped part? I've always been curious exactly like
Sure.
I feel like I've seen like one video or maybe a few videos about it, but I'm just curious, like how does that work?
Yeah, it's not a common thing at all. And it's not I Love Lucy. That's what everyone goes back to, is the I Love Lucy episode. So when it comes to my rosé, I want to get just a little bit of color. And by foot stomping, I'm breaking some of the berries. That juice is going to be in contact with the skins. So when it comes to rosé, that's the only way rosé gets its color, right? If I take a Mourvedre grape and I squeeze it, the juice is clear. Take a Cabernet grape, the juice is clear. The only way that wine gets color is the juice is in contact with the skin so that I can extract from the skins. So different rosés are going to have different colors based on the size of the grape and how much time it sits with skins. So with this case, I'm foot stomping a little bit. When it comes to my red wines, which we're going to get into, all of the red wines you're trying were foot stomped as well. And what I'm doing with my red wines, I like what stems bring to the table. Most winemakers, well over 95% of winemakers, de-stem their red grapes as soon as they come in. They feel that the stems detract from the purity of the fruit that comes in. And I will agree that the fruit gets, my wines are not going to be as fruity, but they're going to have other elements in it that the stems bring to the table. Stems have bitter compounds, they have tannins, so they make the wine more astringent, and they change the aromatics of a wine, generally adding some form of earthiness to the wine. I love wines that have fruit and earth naturally. It's difficult to achieve that if all you're getting is really fruity wines. And it's pretty easy to make fruity wines. Pick grapes really ripe, they're going to be very fruity. The challenge is to have layers in those wines. And I think stems allow that. So I don't let anyone else foot stomp my grapes. I do it all myself. So the grapes come in 1,000-pound bins. It's 4 foot by 4 foot by 3 foot high plastic bin with 1,000 pounds of grapes in it. And you think you're going to step onto that and you're going to sink in, but you don't, because the stems kind of work as a lattice. So the first couple of minutes I'm on the top, and then I punch a hole through to the bottom. And I do that all the way around because I want to break as many of those clusters as I can. And that's only on day one. From there, I do normal fermentation techniques. But I don't let anyone else foot stomp my grapes. And there's 2 reasons why. One is liability, because every year I get stung by bees. I get bit by spiders and yellow jackets that come in with the grapes. Number 2, my favorite movie in the world is Big. And I'm never growing up. If I can stomp grapes for the rest of my life, I'm a really happy guy. Life doesn't need to be too complicated. So, and one of you so badly wants to probably ask me whether I wash my feet. And I always want to ask the question back. Do you want me to tell you what comes in with the grapes? You're not going to be worried about the cleanliness of my feet. We'll leave it at that. Just think of any product, right, that's grown in dirt. You get all kinds of stuff that comes in with the grapes. Now, they all fall out of solution, right? Alcohol kills everything as well, so you don't need to worry about it, but it's always a fun question to ask. So with this, like I said, it was foot stomped only on the skins for an hour, just to get that little bit of color and a little bit of texture. This wine should have more aromatics than the last wine has. And it'll be interesting to hear what you guys think it smells and tastes like, and then I'll go ahead and let you know what I normally get in this wine.
Can I do one more follow-up question about that? So you said that you only foot stomp for an hour with this wine. Does that like get longer with the reds that you foot stomp?
Well, no, I foot stomp this and then I get out and I leave it alone for an hour.
Okay.
Right? With the other ones, I foot stomp. So every half ton bin, I'm in from 5 to 10 minutes, depending upon the variety, because every variety has different shaped and size skins and berries. Some of them require more foot stomping, some of them require less foot stomping. But in this case, I foot stomp, I get out, I leave it on the skins for an hour, and then I go ahead and press it. With the other ones we're going to be tasting, I foot stomp, and then the stems stay in there with the skins and they ferment with those stems.
Got it.
In this case, it's pressed off after an hour.
So I got strawberry Jolly Rancher
Okay.
in the smell, and I loved it before I even drank it. It was pretty strong, pretty clear to me, pretty sweet and delicious smelling. So thank you, because I don't eat strawberry Jolly Ranchers.
And I'm going to guess that it didn't taste the way you thought it was probably going to taste sweet, and it didn't taste sweet.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyone get strawberry, or did other people get other types of fruits?
I got
Yeah, that's very
Welch's
exciting.
grape juice, like the white grape juice, not the red one.
Anyone else? So people tend to get a floral note on this quite a bit. I couldn't really tell you what specific flower, but people just kind of reminds people. And I will say that from the moment these grapes start fermenting, I love to stand next to the fermenting tank, because to me, it smells like unsweetened Hawaiian punch in the best of ways. I tend to get papaya and guava, especially guava and passion fruit in this. And it's not something, again, you're necessarily going to think of when it comes to wine, but if you have like a passion fruit sparkling water, I swear, smell that and smell this, and they're very, very, very similar to each other. And then you'll notice it does have a bit of bitterness. It has acidity, but it also has bitterness. This is still a very young rosé. We tend to think of rosés as being consumed between Memorial Day and Labor Day, kind of like when you're supposed to wear white. But this is actually a fall winter rosé. It's a rosé that the best years, the best time of it lay ahead, probably a year to year and a half. So even though I really enjoy this rosé now, the aromatics of it to me just kind of shoot from the glass. It's going to continue to improve, and that bitterness is going to remain there, but it's going to kind of soften over time. This is a rosé that I actually prefer not having too cold, so maybe 60 degrees rather than ice cold, because I really want to show off that texture and I want to show off those aromatics. The colder it is, it's like people always want to pour their rosés really cold. It's kind of the rosé all day, just drink it. If you do that, the aromatics of this wine kind of get dumbed down, and I think it diminishes what I think is beautiful about the wine. But again, I'm not judging. You want to put an ice cube in it, go for it. It's not my wine anymore.
So does one need a wine refrigerator to achieve the 60-degree? Because for most of us, it's either your fridge or not or outside of the fridge. Right?
Sure. I mean, so it would be more like your fridge is probably going to chill this down to about 40, 45 degrees. So it'd be a matter of taking it out, putting it, pouring a glass and just kind of letting it warm up a little bit. A wine fridge is going to be, most wine fridges are like, they're set for 55 degrees, but you don't need a wine fridge. I mean, if you want to start buying more wine, it's always a good idea to control the temperature at which the wine is stored, but no one, you don't necessarily need that. Just, what you want to do is you want to avoid having the wine sitting in a kitchen that's, fluctuating from 50 degrees to 80 degrees. It's just not good for the long-term ageability of a wine. Any comments or any other questions about the rosé?
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
So I only have like these types of glasses in my kitchen. Does that make a difference in how it tastes, like the shape of a glass?
It does to an extent. Wine glasses are they have a specific shape to kind of bring the aromas up a little bit differently than a regular water glass does. They're also a lot thinner, and the adhesion of the wine to the glass helps change the aromatics of the wine as well. So your aromatics are going to be different than if you do have a wine glass. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. It just means the aromatics are probably not going to be as focused to you. So if you're hearing people describing aromatics, you're like, I don't get that at all. Like that could be why. But you know, there are companies that make 100 different wine glasses, right? And you see all these, you're like, why? And there's a science to it. There is a science. So for instance, the next time you have Prosecco or sparkling wine, have some in a champagne flask and have some in a regular glass. So a couple of things you're going to notice. A champagne flask, you notice the bubbles more. So visually, it's totally different. And then the top of a champagne flute is very small. So the bubbles kind of go right up to your nose. So you kind of get that accentuation. And the shape of it forces the champagne or Prosecco to the back of your throat. So you're going to notice more of the acid at that point. If you have it out of a regular wine glass, it's going to smell and taste totally different. And it's not a better or worse, it's just a different experience. So when it comes to wine glasses, there can be minute differences, but I'm a pretty practical guy. I have one set of glasses. I don't have a set of glasses for reds and whites. I just don't. Again, I'm practical. I don't want to clutter my life any more than I need to. But there are people that will have 14 different sets of glasses depending upon what they're drinking. And they're not wrong for doing that, but those minute differences might not affect you. But the next time, like I said, the next time you have a wine or whatever, have it out of 2 different glasses and see for yourself. You know, to me, that's the beauty of what we're doing here is you should be exploring these things. Don't trust anyone. Don't even trust me. But even the 2-shaped glasses you have, try a little bit in each and see, does that make a difference to you? Because ultimately that's what's important, is if you can't tell the difference, then it doesn't matter. Even if an expert says you're going to notice, if you don't notice it, then it doesn't matter. Right? It's like if you're really into music and somebody says, "Oh, these speakers, oh, they're gonna bring it." Well, if you don't notice the difference, then that's fine that somebody does, but you may not have the ability or desire to notice that difference between them, so it won't matter to you.
Thanks.
Sure. Well, if no other questions, let's go on to the aberration. And this is actually a red wine that I actually prefer to serve chilled. So, you know, we were talking about chilled wines before. There certainly has been a popularity swing on red wines that are chilled, not only because they're easier to drink, but a lighter red wine chilled can be very refreshing and still retain a lot of what it is that people like about the wine. In this case, this is a very fruit-forward wine. And by serving it at room temperature, it's almost like sangria. By serving it chilled, it kind of cuts down some of that fruitiness and adds a little bit of bitterness and a little bit of earthiness that I think create a more balanced wine. And this wine should have some pretty crazy aromatics as well. I also like to say, those of you who are beer drinkers, I like to say this is like a session beer. It's crushable, it's easy drinking, it's complex without being complicated. It's just meant to be fun and easy to drink. And in this case, this is a red wine that's aged entirely in stainless steel. It sees no oak whatsoever. And that creates a very different aromatic and flavor profile. You'll also notice there's a distinct difference between how it smells and how it tastes.
Yeah, it smelled sweet, but it doesn't taste sweet to me at all.
Yeah, very, very, very fruit forward. So now when you say it smells sweet, so we can't smell sweet, Amelia, but we can smell things that remind us of sweet. So does it remind you of like really ripe fruit or something else?
Yeah, ripe fruit, ripe berries maybe.
Okay.
Strawberries.
I feel like I got a split second of smoke.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. The stems definitely added a smoky quality to this for sure. And sometimes, depending upon the temperature, sometimes it's more noticeable, sometimes it's less. I think as you swirl the glass, it kind of dissipates a little bit. But no, there's definitely a smoky quality to this. And again, that's one of those things that, yeah, don't be offended saying that that's what you get. I had somebody try this wine and he said it reminded him of apple cider vinegar. Now, as a winemaker, vinegar is not something I ever want to hear, right? It's like, wait a second here. Now, I know that most people didn't have that experience. And so before I did anything else, I asked him, I said, do you like apple cider vinegar? He goes, I loved it. I said, great. You know, it was something he liked. So ultimately it's not about me. We're all going to perceive things differently. And even though I wouldn't perceive it as such, he did, he liked it. We're all good.
It kind of smells like beets to me.
Beets?
Yeah.
Well, because this was fermented with those stems, it definitely has some earthier, herbaceous qualities to it. And so beets is not something that I would discount at all. I can totally see that. Again, not something most people are going to get, but that's what makes the exercise kind of fun. Now everyone's putting their nose in the glass going, can I get beets? Wait a second here.
I got beets. I got beets.
Well, like I said, once somebody,
I guess you're right. I'm easily.
Yeah, once somebody says something like, I can tell you this wine has diamonds and rubies. Can you smell them? Because I want to sell more of it. No, I do that in the tasting room all the time. I'll taste something and I'll have a group of people like, oh, are you smelling the strawberries or whatever? Like, yeah. I'm like, I don't smell that at all. But I said it and everyone kind of goes towards that, which is kind of how our industry works. We want to sell you, which I just don't want to do. I just want to present the wines and let you guys discover what you discover.
Is your wine sold in stores on the East Coast?
The only state that has a couple of my wines is Pennsylvania, of all places. The PLCB brought in a couple of my wines. But right now, they're only direct to consumer. I don't have distributors. I could sell to DC because DC is the only place outside of California that if I found restaurants to carry my wine, they can bring it in directly. But at this point, they're not.
Mm.
But I ship across the country. I mean, I tell people, if you want to look into some fun things, look into the shipping laws for wine politically. It's a really fun thing. I tell people all day long, I can more easily ship a loaded gun to a minor in this country than I can an ounce of wine to many states. It's kind of crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's we got rid of the mafia, and in their place we got distributors who basically work as the mafia and control certain states and what gets in and what does not get in. It's pretty crazy.
Hmm.
Is this a potential area for bipartisan reform?
Well, it all comes down to, in a sense, it comes down to the availability of consumers to get what they want to get, right? So many states prevent retailers from outside that state to ship alcohol into that state. They're trying to protect the retailers within a state, but that comes at the expense of consumers, right? And every state has separate laws. And that's not looking at wineries, that's just looking at retailer to retailer or retailer to consumer. So it's crazy. The laws for alcohol are crazy. They really are.
Are wine and beer roughly the same? And are they under the same rules? Because I do know that breweries, I feel like they are very select about which states during all this they've been able to ship to. And I was just wondering if wine and beer are kind of on this, are they regulated with the same rules?
For the most part, yes. So it's called the 3-tier system. So if I want to sell wine into another state, I need to find a distributor who's going to buy it, take ownership of it, and then that distributor sells it to retailers and restaurants who then sell it on to the consumer. So there's 3 tiers that need to touch the wine. So it's pretty outrageous from my perspective. Whereas in California, I can sell directly to wine shops, I can sell directly to restaurants, etc. But yeah, breweries are going through the same thing, and every state has different regulations and different ways that you qualify to sell into that state. So you basically need a compliance specialist who understands these things, and then you have to pay lots of money every year to be able to do it. It's just a crazy system. I'll take a look at that, America's Dumbest Drinking Laws. I'm sure there's some fun ones in there. I'll definitely take a look at that when we're done.
And that's a conservative think tank. So when Ann says we're always looking for issues that Republicans and Dems can align on, so maybe there is hope.
Oh, I know that, like I said, every state fights this battle separately. There's no national law on this. That's the challenge, right? It gets into interstate commerce. And once it's in interstate commerce, every state has the ability to kind of dictate what they want and how they want to do it. So any other questions about the aberration?
I do.
Yes, Amy.
What kind of wine is this like? of the like main categories and like, is this dry? Like, you know.
Sure. So, well, first of all, if depending upon how you drink your coffee, it may be dry or not dry, right?
Oh, okay. Maybe I missed that part.
Yeah, I was talking about before. Yes, if you drink your coffee black, you're very sensitive to sweetness, and you're going to find things sweet that other people don't find sweet. But we also need to talk about sweetness in terms of fruit sweet or actually sugar sweet. So this wine has no residual sugar in it. So it's not sweet in terms of sugar, but it is very fruit forward. Therefore, people would find it potentially sweet. It's kind of a tweener wine, right? That's one of the reasons I call it aberration, is it's not normal. So to me, it's heavier than a rosé. It's lighter than most red wines, and it's definitely different than most white wines. So I would say the category, it's going to be more like a Beaujolais or a Gamay in terms of varieties. So if you ever have tried a Beaujolais Nouveau, it would be similar to this in terms of kind of a crushable red wine that's relatively easy drinking. To me, this is the type of wine that it's late in the afternoon. It's too hot for a red. But you want something with a little more substantialness than a white. This kind of fits that mold perfectly. Well, cool. Let's move on to the first non-chilled red, which is my Cinsault, Cinsault. So the current wine, the aberration, is 60% Cinsault, but that was picked earlier and that was made specifically for this stainless steel. This Cinsault was foot stomped, fermented, and then aged for 16 months in older French oak barrels. So it's going to have very different aromatics and a very different texture than the last wine does. I affectionately refer to this as my MTV Unplugged wine. So I like to say, in the face of big and bold, this is my 22-year-old in a corner with their ukulele unmiked. You know, it's not a fully amped band, but I love the aromatics of this wine. I love the texture of this wine. It's only about 12% alcohol. So somebody, you were asking before about alcohol levels. For red wine, that's pretty low. Most red wines are going to be 13 to 15 and even higher. At 12%, it's pretty darn low. And this wine reminds a lot of people aromatically of a Pinot Noir.
Sorry, what did you say it reminds a lot of people of aromatically?
Of a Pinot Noir.
I taste the oak a lot.
So when you say you taste the oak, is it coming across as smoky, bitter?
You know, I was just gonna say I don't think I have, the word smoke came to mind, and I was gonna ask how to kind of think about smoke and oak because they run together for me.
Yeah.
So I would say smoky to answer that question.
Okay.
I also get vanilla.
Yeah, I talked before about people describing scenarios. About a month ago, I did a tasting and on this wine, and you know, to me, I know you guys are probably tired of being on Zoom. To me, Zoom is still a relatively new thing, right? I didn't use Zoom before COVID, and I love it. I've done about 100 of these, and I love the fact that it's kind of personal in the sense that if I do a wine tasting here, everyone is kind of going to be in their own little world, right? And it's going to be difficult to get their attention. Not that I have all of your attention, but everyone is kind of looking. But I'm also able to look at faces. This woman had this really interesting look on her face. I'm like, talk to me. She goes, well, she said, Larry, she said, I was in the military. She said she was stationed in the Middle East in Qatar. And she said when she smelled this wine, it brought her back to going into an open air market in Qatar and being enveloped by spice and color. And I just thought it was so cool. And no one else is going to have that experience, right? But I just thought it's really interesting that somebody could have that strong. It's kind of like the funnel cake, fair type thing. Like it just, you smell something. To me, it's the Ratatouille moment. I love to say that. I love that movie. But it's that tasting that Ratatouille and the string going back to sitting in the kitchen with his mom. Smells can make you do that if you allow them to kind of go there, which makes it fun. But the challenge is to disassociate what you're smelling from disassociate the picture in front of you to whatever that smell is. So people oftentimes talk about this wine having like light cherry, strawberry, like underripe strawberry, lot of spice, definitely some smoke. On the flavor, people oftentimes talk about a peppery, like a white pepper quality to it as well. So I do a lot of winemaker dinners. I haven't over the last year, but I did a virtual one in December with a restaurant in LA where I drove down, I sat inside, the chef sat outside, and we Zoomed a dinner for about 90 minutes. And it was the dinner was called Jingle Balls. It was all ball related food because it was in December, right? So we had arancini, so we had rice balls, we had meatballs. We ended the dinner, of course, with sweaty balls. If those of you haven't seen the skit on Saturday Night Live, please do so. I'm not meant to offend. It's a really funny skit. And it was actually the anniversary of the first showing of that. But this wine was paired with what the chef called Saul Rodriguez's matzo ball pozole. So it was duck fat matzo balls and a spicy pozole broth. It was a great mashup. In fact, I'm working on another dinner with him in the spring, and it's going to be sliders around the world. So all different proteins, all different spices. And the working title for it right now is What's Between Your Buns. So yeah, I like to have fun with these things.
Wait, so how does that work with the food? He sends the recipes to the participants, or he just sits there and eats his delicious food and talks about it?
Oh no, people come to the restaurant and pick the food up and bring it home.
Got it.
And this, I mean, hopefully in the spring we'll be able to do kind of a, I mean,
fresco.
Another month or two, we'll be able to do outdoor seating as well as having people bring it home if they're more comfortable doing that.
That's
So
great.
people bring it home and then we just kind of get on for an hour. And I kind of like this. I mean, I tell people that by the time we're done, you're going to feel like you sat through a dysfunctional family meal. Those are my favorite kind of tastings where, you're having fun, but it's okay to not have it be so nice, so to speak. Speak your mind, and that's fine. So any other comments about this wine, the Cinsault? So it is a variety you're rarely going to see bottled on its own. It is grown in the Rhone Valley, but it's not a very popular variety in the Rhone. It's generally a blending variety. I make a rosé out of this variety as well. The berries are huge. Think of the largest table grape you can, and that's the size of the berry. That's why this wine doesn't have a lot of color, because I talked about extracting color. You don't get a lot of color. If you compare this to the next wine, you're going to see a radically different color between those two wines. It's grown in South Africa, and one of the main varieties in South Africa is called Pinotage. That's kind of one of the varieties that country is known for. Pinotage is actually a cross between Pinot Noir and another variety that they call Hermitage, which turns out to be Cinsault. So there's 100-year-old Cinsault vines in South Africa as well. But again, it's just not something you're going to find much of in this country at all.
Larry, what is your take on to drink organic wine or not to drink organic wine?
Oh, I mean, I see no problem with organic wines whatsoever. I
guess it's more like, they just came out with the 2021 Dirty Dozen, which is like the 12 vegetables you must eat organic because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, what, I guess more, the question really is, what's your stance? Like, is it important to drink organic wine or, is it dirty? I don't know.
That's a really interesting question. And it's a question that I can answer multiple ways, right? So philosophically, I think it's great for there to be more organic vineyards that are out there. The reality is that all the vineyards I work with are farmed sustainably. Some are farmed organically. One of them is farmed biodynamically. So, what you eat and drink, how it's made should be important. But organic doesn't necessarily mean anything you're going to like in and of itself, right? And that's the challenge. Is there should be a litmus test of, do I enjoy this, right? So there's organic, biodynamic, natural wines that just I don't think are very good, but people seem to love them because of the process by which they're made. And I understand that philosophically, but I also have people coming into my tasting room, they're like, what's the weirdest smelling wine you make? Like, hold on a second. But they desire, it's kind of like you get into music. Like, I need to hear the weirdest music I can because no one else is going to be into this. And then everyone gets into it. there's some interesting wines out there that are made organically, that are made biodynamically, that are made naturally, but there's a lot of really bad ones as well. One of the challenges with a lot of these wines is they try to get away from using sulfur dioxide. Now, sulfur dioxide is a naturally occurring chemical, and what it does is it's an oxygen scavenger that prevents wine from becoming what it wants to become, which is vinegar, right? It's a natural progression for wine. Sulfur dioxide prevents that. So if you don't use sulfur dioxide, there's a decent chance that over time that wine is going to have bacterial issues that you don't want it to have. So I need to be able to stand behind my product. And so there's certain things that I'm going to do that a minimalist wouldn't do. I'm okay with that. If somebody doesn't want to buy my wine because it doesn't have a certain label on it, then that's okay. I can respect that completely, but there's only so much that I feel I can do to create the best product I can. So kind of coming full circle, there are great organic wines out there. I don't think that should be the litmus test for whether that's something you should drink. And now there's a whole bunch of wine bars that are being set up, for instance, that are only serving organic and biodynamic. If you like the wines, that's great. But to me, that's kind of not being nonpartisan. Let's put it that way. That's being incredible. Going back to your world, that's being partisan, right? That's saying that we are going to pre-select this group of wines and you either like them or too bad. And I just don't think that's the way consumerism should work, personally.
Yep. Yeah.
I have a question. I feel like there's a debate between like corked wines and screw top wines. I was wondering where your winery falls in that and what your kind of thoughts are.
So every wine
I thought maybe that was a fake background. Nice.
Oh,
It
no,
is
no,
real.
I like to say it's a drinkable background. I mean, if this tasting does not go well, you're going to see wines taken off here and drunk. So it's a security blanket for me. I'm 100% screw cap. I've been 100% screw cap for 15 years. I have no problem with corks, natural corks, except for two things. Number one, there's a chemical that grows on natural cork that you can't see, you can't smell. When the wine touches that cork, the wine is corked. Now, most people are not familiar with the term corked, and that's the wine industry's fault. When I ask most consumers if they know what a corked wine is, C-O-R-K-E-D, the reaction is, well, it's when there's a cork in the bottle, it's corked. Or it's when the wine smells like vinegar or it's gone bad. But there's actually a chemical called TCA, stands for trichloroanisole. When the way that natural corks are made is that they strip the bark from a cork tree and they air dry it and then they process it. Well, if any chlorine gets anywhere near that, it creates this chemical. Can't see it, can't smell it. As soon as that cork touches the wine, it makes the wine smell very specifically like wet cardboard or a damp basement. So if you've ever had a wine that smelled kind of moldy under natural cork, that's what caused it. Most consumers don't realize that. So as a producer of a consumer product, I can't live with the fact that people wouldn't understand that a wine that they might feel is my fault is not my fault at all. The other thing about natural cork, one of its best things, it's one of its worst things. It's all natural. The cell structure in one cork is different than another, which means that the amount of oxygen that gets in and out of one wine is different than another. Now, in a best case scenario, those differences are minute and the wines are going to develop along the same path. The reality is oftentimes they're very different and the cell structures are very different. So it's not uncommon to have two bottles from the same case at 10 years of age, for instance, that have no familial resemblance to each other. I understand the romanticism of wine and how we want wines to evolve and change, and they still do with screw caps. Screw caps, I have different liners that go into different bottles depending on how much oxygen I want to get in and out of that wine. But I have to rule out variability as much as I can in winemaking. I still want my wine to be alive, and under screw caps they are, but I also need to be able to stand behind my product. So that's why I've chosen to use screw caps. Screw caps are not perfect. There's problems that could occur with them as well. I just feel the problems that can occur with them are minimized compared to the problems that occur with natural cork. But I'm not anti-cork. I'm trying to be nonpartisan here as best I can, right? I'm running for political office in 2 years, so I've got to make sure I don't piss anyone off too badly. No, I've had beautiful wines, 50-year-old wines under natural cork that were gorgeous. But I've also had wines that I worked on at Fess Parker. 2 days after they were bottled, they smell like wet cardboard. And there's nothing more aggravating than I mean, imagine working on something for 2 years, right? You work on a policy, and I'm sure it happens, and I'm sure you work on a policy for 2 years, and all of a sudden everything is set, everything is great, and then 2 days after, some judge throws it out for some stupid little thing. You're like, wait a second. To me, it's so aggravating. So I can't deal with that as a producer of a consumer product.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, well, let's move on to the last wine. So the last wine is my Mourvedre. So Mourvedre is originally called Mataro or Monastrell. It's a Spanish variety. Another winemaker in my area calls it Move Over Dear. It's not a very easy variety to pronounce, and I understand that. So that's kind of why he does that. Mourvedre, if you've ever heard of a blend of a GSM blend, seems they're pretty popular blends in this country. It's Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre. In the Rhone Valley, Mourvedre is an important blending component, rarely bottled on its own, because Mourvedre tends to have a lot of earth. And so, that's what I love it. To me, it's a perfect blend of fruit and earth. It has great brambly kind of wild fruit, but it's got these cool undertones that I really, really like. This one is going to appear, I mean, it's got a lot more alcohol, not a lot more, but it's about 14.5%. So compared to the last ones, it's kind of shoot out of the glass a little bit more. And it's also aromatically and texturally going to have more going on because of that alcohol as well. This was also aged for 34 months, almost 3 years in older French oak barrels, as opposed to about half that for the last one. So that's going to lead to more aromatic complexity, and it's going to lead to more texture.
Does the price correlate with how long it ages?
In my case or in general?
General.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There is absolutely zero correlation between price and anything for most wines.
Okay.
I mean, it's, a lot of it is dependent upon expectations of what the consumer expects to pay. But no, there's wines that are aged for, you can get great Spanish wines, for instance, that are aged for 5-6 years that are going to be very reasonably priced. And then you can get wines that were only aged for 11 months that might be, $100 or $200. So that there should be some correlation, but there's not. In my case, there is. The wines that I age for less time are less expensive than the wines I age for more time.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say what your case is? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
So like, for instance, the pricing, so my Cinsault, the last red wine we have, is priced at $38. This Mourvedre, which was aged longer, is priced at $44. So there is some correlation between how long I'm aging the wine and my price to a small extent, just to differentiate them. So, and this is actually my current wine, current release. So even though it's a 2014, it was in oak for about 3 years. It's been in bottle now for about 3.5. And I tend to release my wines when they're drinking well, but still have upside potential. This is a wine that's still, even though it's a 2014, it's very young. By never taking it out of the barrel during aging, I keep it tightly wound. And then by having it in screw caps, it develops slower than if it was in a natural cork.
This feels like a wine I could bring to the beach on like an evening and drink. Like, it's very like chill.
Yeah, I mean, it's smooth, right? It's not. It does have tannin, and what tannins are, that's they dry your tongue out, like you're feeling like you're eating cotton balls. Some red wines have more tannins than others. I would say this is probably light to medium. The fact that it's been in bottle as long as it has and was oak as long as it has really helped mellow it out quite a bit. But this wine also changes a lot. It may sound weird, but the longer it's in your glass, probably the more body it's going to have. It's going to kind of, I look at it, I look at oxygen like CPR. It like brings a wine back to life and kind of expands it a little bit. So anyone getting specific aromas or flavors?
Oh, I was just about to ask a question about that. I don't know what I'm supposed to be tasting because I really like this, but I'm just curious and I know that I shouldn't be tasting stuff because I know it's personal to all of us, but I was just curious what generically you describe this as, because I do really like it. I just can't pin it down.
I tend to get, I mean, aromatically, I tend to get, personally, like more red fruit, cherry, even cranberry. And that may sound weird, but cranberry is not something you necessarily think of. But when I think of, I say brambly fruit, right? So like wild raspberries, not like candied fruit, but more earthy fruit a little
When you
bit.
said cherry, that's it.
And then I tend to get a really nice herbaceousness in this wine. Not necessarily green bell peppers, but more like herbs de Provence and stuff like that. I tend to get, we talked about smoky and peppery. The stems kind of lead to a touch of smoke in all of my wines, but not like, more like a tobacco smoke than anything else, which is kind of, to me, it's kind of backing the herbaceousness a little bit. And then I find this wine has good acidity. So when you think of acidity, you think of eating a lemon, right? That's kind of the feeling this wine has. It gives it, you know, when a red wine has acidity, it's almost refreshing to drink. And this wine has a touch of that. And this is a wine I love to pair with earthy foods, things that have herbs, things that have mushrooms, because the earthiness, it kind of works both ways. But I'm not, you know, a lot of people worry so much about pairing your wine with food, right? And I get people that come into my tasting room like, if I buy this wine, what do I pair it with? And my first reaction is pair it with Wednesday night, right? You know, everyone's going to be different with what they think a wine should be paired with. I did a seminar a couple of years ago and they asked us what we'd pair our wines with. And the guy next to me, there were 5 winemakers, 150 people in the audience. The guy next to me had a Pinot Noir. I said, what would you pair this with? He goes, well, I'd pair this with salmon, but it's got to be line caught salmon from this particular river. So I hope everyone saw me roll my eyes. I had a Syrah. Larry, what would you pair your Syrah with? I looked at the audience. I pulled the mic close. I said, I'd pair it with nachos. And everyone started busting up. Moderator's name was Sean. Sean's like, no, Larry, it's a serious question. I said, Sean, I seriously like nachos. You know, for me, the best pairing of wine is family, friends, and coworkers. You know, wine is a lubricant for conversation. If you're in Italy, if you're in France, if you're in Portugal, there's a carafe of red on the table, a carafe of wine on the table. You want a rosé, we're gonna blend the two together. No one's looking at Vivino or Delectable or any, it's like, you're just drinking it, right? And at its core, that's what wine should be about. It should be about enjoyment and not about anything else. I joke all the time about wine versus beer in this country. I can go to any brewery. I could order any beer I want. No one cares. I can get a shandy, half lemonade, still okay. But if I walk into a wine bar in Washington, D.C. and I say, I have a glass of white Zinfandel and say it really loud, people are going to think I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Now, I don't care. If that's what you drink, no problem. I don't care. But we get judged oftentimes on the wines we choose to drink. And I just think it's wrong. You know, wine in this country so often becomes about status as opposed to enjoyment, whereas wine elsewhere is just part of the culture. So I don't think we're ever going to get there in this country. It'd be great if we did, but it's like, you know, if you order a mixed cocktail, no one cares what you're ordering. But when it comes to wine, all of a sudden you're judged. And I don't agree. And if you like spicy Thai and Indian food, white Zinfandel, perfect pairing for it. Perfect pairing for it. I will say sweet does cut spice. So even though I talked about there's no real great pairings for food and wine, sweetness goes great with curries in general. Well, cool. Any other questions or comments about this wine or about any of the wines that we had?
Did you say this is the your newest wine, or how did you phrase that? I'm sorry.
It's my current vintage. So, okay. You know, if you go into a wine shop where you are, most of the red wines are going to be 2018s, 2019s. They're going to be very, very young wines. This is a 2014, which seems like it's an old wine to many people. But as I said, to me, it's an incredibly lively wine. It's just the way that I make the wine, I'm kind of holding on to its youth longer so that when I release it, it doesn't taste like a wine that's, you know, nearly 7 years old now, was the point. And in fact, my 2017s are still in barrel. I haven't even bottled them yet. So people are, you know, selling 2018s and 19s, and my 2017, I probably won't be selling until 2024. So
I know for certain this wine has caused me to commit to get beef curry tonight. It's just like, straight to the takeout for some reason.
love it. Well, it's because I've got a connection with the takeout restaurant in your town. We have a connection here, so yeah. Well, all of you, if you have that piece of paper, you all have contact information for me. You have my email address. Feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions about wine. I mean, if it's 2 a.m. and you're like, should I buy this wine at a restaurant? Don't text me. But other than that, certainly feel free to reach out. There is a code there if you wanted to order some wine. I do make about a dozen wines altogether. So this is just a kind of a small sampling. My goal in doing these tastings is to provide 5 wines that are very distinct. I can't control whether you like or dislike my wines, but as long as each of them gave you a different experience, that's my goal. You know, it's like going into a Chinese restaurant. If you order 6 dishes and 5 of them taste the same, something's wrong. So if you do a tasting, and you have 5 wines and 4 of them are identical, to me, that would be problematic. So hopefully I achieve that. But yeah, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out. Kinsey, you'll be getting your wines and I'll send you the link to this. And so you can enjoy them separately and then see how crazy all of your coworkers are for finding what they found.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, of course. All right. Well, and if you'd like, I can leave the Zoom so you guys can enjoy the Zoom yourself. It's up to you. If you want to stay on, you can. I don't have another Zoom after this, or you can get off or whatever you'd like to do. Kinsey,
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Do you want to stay on or should I close it for everybody?
Anybody want to stay on? Raise your hand.
What was that?
Oh, I was just saying, anyone want to stay on? Raise your hand.
I'm going to get you guys are done for the day. So, oh wait, Michael wants to stay on. Hold on a second. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop the recording, but then I'm going to let you guys stay on and feel free to stay on and hang out. But thank you all very much. Again, I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.